Hey guys, Will here. So today we're taking a look at Grid Engineering's DDU5 sim racing dashboard system. This is utilizing a 480 by 272 resolution USB D480 display. We've seen this display used in a couple of other dashes, one that we reviewed here on the channel before, but this also adds the functionality of RGB LEDs that are also brightness adjustable and comes in a really beautiful anodized aluminium enclosure as well. So today we'll be checking it out, seeing whether it is something that we would recommend for use on your sim rig. So let's get stuck into it. Let's take a look at what we get inside the box here. Now, while we're quickly unpackaging this, I do just want to quickly mention that obviously this is a very expensive and high-end premium dashboard that, it's not going to appeal to everybody. Now, there are ways that you can achieve a lot of the same functionality that we're going to be looking at today. There are some differences and we'll cover that for you guys as well, so you know exactly what you are getting for the money. But you can use an old tablet or smartphone to set up a dash with a lot of the same functionality should you wish to do that. A lot of people have old tablets and old phones laying around at home that they can put to good use to achieve something like this. We do have a video on the channel as well where we covered that in detail. It was quite a long time ago now, but we'll link it down in the description below for you guys so you can check that out. But look, there is a place for dedicated gear like this as well, I think, and I personally like to have a dedicated device on the rig. I just find it's a little bit cleaner, not having to go through menus, worried about whether the battery's flat or not, things like that. It can just make it a little bit more of a streamlined experience. So just wanted to clarify that for you guys before we do get started here, because I know that this is an expensive product that's not going to appeal to every single person. So inside the box here, pretty basic and simple. We've got our Simhub 2 mount here. Now there are a bunch of other mounts available as well, and I got him to send me everything. Now he can do custom made mounts as well, but these are all the different mounts that are available off the shelf. So we've got an AccuForce mount. We've got a Simhub 2 Sport and Pro mount, which is a little bit different from the Simhub 2 Ultimate mount, which is this guy. I think he's actually sent me 2 of the Sport and Pro mounts. So that's all good. We've got a Fanatec CSL, so the CSL Elite wheelbase. We've got DD1 and DD2, as well as a SimMagic M10 mount as well. So pretty much all the essential bases covered there, but he can do custom mounts as well. So if you've got a unique mounting solution that you need for your particular situation, then that is possible too. And this is nice, high quality 3mm thick carbon fiber as well. And it is genuine carbon fiber. So no problems at all there. Nice beveled edges on it. And every bit as good as any other bit of carbon fiber that I've seen here on the channel in the past. So nothing to complain about at all there. And the dash itself is going to screw onto the back here, so we can slide this up and down to get our height right. Now, height adjustment is going to be very important here as well, because obviously we're going to need to be able to adjust the height of the dash depending on the wheel that we're using. We want to be able to see it through the wheel, or if we're using a formula style wheel, we might need to raise it up a little bit more. But let's get into the main event here. I haven't had a proper look at this yet either, only just pictures online. So I'm seeing this for the first time as you guys are. Really heavy, really quite hefty. We'll flash the weight up on the screen for you guys as well, because it is quite a solid little piece of kit. But okay, that is actually really, really nice. I wasn't sure exactly what we were going to be getting for $579 US, but that is really, really, really quite something else. Beautiful anodized. It's kind of a gloss anodized aluminium as well. It's not that sort of normal matte finish, and it's got beautiful kind of brushed texture on it as well. Really does look and feel extremely premium. So it's a 6061 CNC machined aluminium enclosure, and yeah, that is absolutely beautiful. So the glass itself is a 2mm thick borosilicate glass. Same kind of glass as we see used in things like Pyrex dishes for cooking. So it can take a lot of heat cycles and temperature fluctuations and stuff like that. And all that's really relevant for sim racing. But it's not just a piece of polycarbonate or anything like that. It is a high quality glass that's being used in there, 2mm thick as well. And you can see how that's really nicely sunken in to the aluminium bezel there. It sits pretty much, yeah, it is actually completely flush. And just everywhere you look on this, really, really beautiful finish. You can see the little USB plug in the back there as well. Now, interestingly, it is using a USB mini plug, which is not something you see used all that often anymore. Now, I personally would have liked to have seen some sort of a proprietary connector on here, kind of similar to what we had with the SimCore dash that we reviewed a little while ago. Let me just grab that cable out for you quickly now. So this used a, not proprietary, it's an off-the-shelf connection, but a nice connection there. But now, I did actually ask him about this, And he said to me, the reason he's done it this way is simply because, you know, if you have a cable like this and you break it for some reason, you're completely at the mercy of the manufacturer. You've got to wait for them to send you out a new one. Whereas a USB mini cable like this one is something you can just pick up from, you know, your local supermarket even sells these, or hardware store, computer store. You know, you're going to be able to pick one of these up, or you probably have multiple ones of these laying around spare anyway. So that was the reason, at least that's what he told me, as to why they've gone down this path. Now, one other thing that I'm noticing as well is the way this is actually mounted on the back of the enclosure here means that you shouldn't have any problems with this snapping off. One of the things I was worried about is, you know, being a connector that's not really designed to take any load, when it's plugged in, if you were to bump it or get it snagged or something, it might actually just tear the connection off the PCB internally. But you can see here, even though it does have a little bit of wiggle in it, the housing of the connector, or the plastic sheath around the outside, is actually slightly recessed or slightly penetrating inside the aluminium closure here. So that means that it's not really going to put any load. It's going to hit up against the side of the aluminium enclosure before it puts too much load on the connector itself. So personally, I am a bit of a sucker for high quality connectors. It's just kind of a thing that I have, but I do definitely see the merit in using something that's easily replaceable as well. Now, this cable that we get with this is just a little bit over 2 meters long as well, so it should be plenty long enough to run back to your PC or USB hub should you need to plug it into a hub on your rig. And yeah, that's pretty much, I think, everything that we need to cover in terms of cabling and connections and things like that. There's not really a whole lot to look at here. I mean, it's just a really beautifully presented piece of equipment. You can see the grid logo on the glass down the bottom here, and here are our little RGB LEDs that are brightness and color adjustable. And we've got 20 of those, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on each side, and then 10 along the top. And those are all completely customizable through the various different software packages that we'll take a look at in just a moment. But yeah, look, I mean, overall here, just a really beautifully presented. And I mean, I know it is extremely expensive and there's no way around that, but you know, I've got to say it does feel like a high quality piece of equipment. I can definitely, you know, appreciate the value in what I'm holding here, which is something I was a little bit concerned about given the price. So before we get all up and running on the sim and talk about software and configuration, let's talk a little bit more about the display and the LEDs that we have on here. So it's a 5-inch USB D480 display, pretty commonly used, as we mentioned earlier. It's 480 by 272 resolution. So not the highest resolution in the world. We'll comment on whether or not that's really noticeable in the context of using it as a sim racing dash once we get up and driving in a minute. Now, USB D480 displays are available in a touchscreen variant as well. This being sitting behind glass and the USB D480 being a resistive touchscreen rather than capacitive. We can't get the touchscreen to actually work behind the glass panel. So this isn't the touchscreen variant. This is just a basic display, but we'll comment on that and whether it's something that we miss once we're up and running as well. But one thing that I do think is quite clever about this design is the fact that they're using a single USB connection to drive both the LEDs as well as the display. I don't know whether there's some sort of a root hub internally that's allowing them to do that. They didn't want us to open this up and show the insides because they didn't want anybody else to copy their design. So we're going to respect that and not open it up and show you guys the PCB. But yeah, just wanted to draw attention to the fact it is using that single USB connection to drive both the LEDs and the display, which I think is quite clever. The PCB or printed circuit board internally, from what they tell me, is also wave soldered or machine soldered rather than hand soldered as well, which takes away a lot of that kind of variance or tolerance in the quality of the build as well. So I don't anticipate that there'll be any issues with this, but obviously we'll let you guys know over time if we do run into any problems. But I think that's pretty much everything we need to cover in terms of the hardware side of things. So let's get it all rigged up on the sim now and see how it performs. So we're sitting here in a Cayman GT4. You can see the dash is all up and running and looking quite nice. But what I wanted to do first is run you through the software installation, a couple of things around the community and, you know, plugins and things like that as well, as just explain a little bit more about the versatility of the product before we go in and go for a drive. So we're going to bring up Grid Engineering's Discord community here. We've got a channel here for how to install. We've got a driver download link for the LCD, which is the USB D480 display, as well as the PCB driver for the LEDs too. So 2 separate installation packages you need to install. They do have a really good video as well that takes you through all of this in detail. So I don't really feel like we need to do that in the video as well. But yeah, just download both of those packages, get the software installed, and you shouldn't have too many dramas. One thing I did notice is in Simhub, I did have to go and disable the old display that I had connected previously. There was a bit of a conflict there, but once I did that, no dramas at all getting up and running. Everything just kind of worked, which is great. Now, because this is a USB D480 display, it does work with a wide variety of different software packages. So Joel Real Timing, Z1 Dashboard, and Simhub all work with this, which is fantastic. Now, I think it's important to call that out because a lot of other dashes that we've seen, including the ones that are included on Cube Controls wheels that have the LEDs around them, are using the Ultimate Game Tech display. And that is, a very versatile package within its own right, but you do have to use their own software and you're kind of limited to what you can do within that particular package in terms of what you can display on the display itself. So with this one, because we're able to interface it with various different software titles, we've got a lot more versatility, and I think that that's a good thing. So I think that's something that we did need to point out here for you guys. But within the Discord community, on top of the installation instructions, we do have quite a lot of files, profiles, things like that people have submitted themselves. Now, one thing that I would like to see, and I'm sure we will see over time, if we just click on a couple of tabs here, you can see Grid Engineering have posted quite a few of their own profiles, but the majority of the ones that I'm finding are quite good to work with are ones that are user submitted, particularly Patrick and Adam's profiles here, and those are the ones that Grid actually suggested that I use as well for testing out for this video. So I do think that that's one thing that we'll see improve over time is, have a more all-encompassing package of profiles that we can download and sort of import into Simhub and just kind of have everything running out of the box. So there's a little bit less sort of fiddling around to find your own things. But one of the great strengths of Simhub in saying that is that you can find profiles for pretty much any car you want. Just jump onto Race Department, download it, and chances are somebody's already made something that's perfect for what you want, which is exactly what we've done here with the Cayman GT4 Dash. So Simhub is absolutely fantastic in that regard. But let's jump out now and actually go into Simhub. We'll give you a quick look at Z1 Dashboard as well a little bit later on. I'm not going to touch on Joel Real Timing in this video. I think that deserves its own video separately, but we'll open up Simhub here. So there's a couple of things that we do need to do here just to get the dash and the LEDs functioning correctly. So we're going to start off by clicking on Dash Studio, and we're going to click on USB D480. Make sure that we have Enable Display checked here. Now you can configure other little bits and pieces here. You can choose idle behavior, so whether you want the display to stay on when it's not being used, and you can fiddle around here. You can see I've got touch screen disabled here because this particular display isn't touch screen compatible, and we can see here it's showing as being connected to the display. So as long as you're seeing all of that, everything's functional here, then you should be good to go. The issue that I mentioned before with the conflict was because we had connect to specific screen selected and we had the old screen selected in that box, so it wasn't connecting to this one. So once we sorted that out, problem was solved. You can see now that is loaded back in. So then clicking on dashboards, we can see we've got all of our default cooked in dashes that come with Simhub, as well as the ones that we can load in ourselves through various profiles. So it's as simple as just downloading the file from Race Department, double clicking on it, and it loads straight into the software. Very, very straightforward. And all we need to do here, just select the one that we want. We can click on Start on USB D480, and you can see straight away it changes over to the next screen. We're going to leave it on Cayman GT4 for now though, because that's the car that we're driving. And then we can go in and configure the LEDs. So we click on Arduino here, and depending on what we have connected will determine exactly how we do this. But in my case, I'm going to click on My Hardware, and I have multiple Arduinos connected. So we should see Simhub Dash here showing as connected. You can see my WinSim showing up and the old dashboard, which is currently disconnected. So once we're showing as connected here for the current dash, we can click across to RGB LEDs. And this is where we can see all of the effects that are being applied at present. Now, because these are RGB LEDs, we've got a huge range of things that we can do here. And it's impossible to touch on absolutely every single thing that you can do for the scope of this video, but I just wanted to quickly run you through a few things just to give you an idea of the scale of what you can do here. So at the moment, you can see we've got a pit indicator running. So we can see it's showing that we have our pit limiter switched on. Then from this little panel, we can input dummy data to make the display respond as if we were driving in the real game. So if we crank up our engine RPMs, you can see revs up on the screen. Gear selection, if we had anything assigned to that. Pit limiter, so that's what we had on before there. You can see that flashing again, and so forth. You can scroll down, you can see we've got lights for ABS, ABS active, traction control enabled or active, DRS, all those things. Even turn indicators are there. Flags as well. So if I click on yellow flags, for example, you can see the yellow flags flash up on the display. So it's super cool. Even spotter as well. So you can have the flag LEDs on the sides light up, for example, if you've got a car beside you, which is really handy if you don't like to run an audio spotter. We're going to switch that off again for now. And what we can do is we can scroll down through these, we can actually see what is currently active. So if we go back to our RPM, for example, crank that all the way up to the maximum, you can see here under RPM 0 to 100, we can extend that. And we actually do have the, we've got it meeting in the middle at the moment. So if we scroll up and down, you can see it kind of scrolls in from the middle. I might actually switch that off, so it's just coming in from one side, like that. There we go. I think I prefer that personally. But again, like the sky's the limit here. You can really just get as creative as you like. So we'll run that up, and you can see we can change the starting position. So if we wanted to make it start from down on the side, we could do that just by changing the starting position or the ending position as well. So we can make it go, we can make it wrap all the way around if we wanted to, but I kind of just like to have it running along the top like that, and that keeps the flag LEDs on the side spare for when we have flags displaying. So that gives you a basic understanding of exactly how we tweak things in here. You can change whether you want it to be based off percentage or RPM. And again, just have a look in here. What I would suggest is download this software. It is free to download. There is a paid version as well that just increases the refresh rate. You don't really need that for running a dash though. Download the software, have a play around, and just get a feel for what's possible in here. But if we go to add effect quickly as well, this will give you an idea of all the things that we can do. So delta, fuel, RPM, speed, turbo boost, ABS. I mean, just look at the list. Goes on and on and on and on. So you can imagine just how many different things you can configure to really get this dialed into exactly how you want it. But let's quickly jump out on the track now. I'll give you a quick drive and show you how it all kind of functions. We'll talk about the quality of the display a little bit more, brightness and things like that as well. One thing I will mention actually while we're on the subject of brightness, you can see up here in Simhub, I've got my overall brightness for the LEDs set to about 40%. It does start to get a little bit funny if we go under 10%. You can see here colors may not render as expected if we're under 2%, but I noticed it looked a little bit funny below 10%. They did also recommend we don't go above 50%. Not that it's going to cause damage or anything, but it is very, very, very bright, particularly if you're racing in a dark room. You might find it straining your eyes a little bit too much. So I like to keep that down around about 40, 50% for me. And that should be everything we need. So let me switch off that test data again, make sure that's not doing anything. And we'll go for a quick drive and talk about the display some more. All right, so we're here in iRacing, all gridded up against some AI cars. I wanted to do a race against some AI cars just to show you some of the additional functionality that we have on this dash beyond just sort of displaying what you would normally have on the dash of the car. Because I think this is one of the questions that I had when I first had a dash on my car years ago now. And I know what a lot of people are thinking is it looks cool, but you know, what's the point of having something that's just replicating what you already have on the screen anyway? So what we can do here is display a bunch of additional telemetry, relative times, you know, relative to other cars, all those sorts of things. We'll cover that in detail in just a moment. But first I wanted to just sort of talk about the experience of actually having this on the car, because one thing that you will notice with having a dash, even though it is, you know, in the instance that we have it here, or the scenario that we have here, essentially just replicating what we have on the screen in front of us anyway, having it kind of offset and in front of us away from the screen does add a little bit more depth and a little bit more immersion to the overall experience of sitting in the sim rig. That might sound a little bit silly, but just having it separate, having it as a physical device on the rig, you know, it really does add something that you don't get from just having it on the screen. So I wanted to make that clear. Now, admittedly, obviously there are far cheaper ways of achieving that, but you know, it is what it is, and I wanted to point that out. Now, another thing that I know a lot of people are going to be wondering about here is screen resolution. Being a 480 by 272 resolution screen, it is definitely lower resolution, and you do notice that. It just doesn't have the sharpness of a modern smartphone, or you know, any smartphone that's basically been made in the last 10 years, if we're honest. But you can still see the things that you need to see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we switch to some of the other screens in just a moment too. But just looking at the dash here, I can read all the numbers that I need to read. Everything is as clear as it needs to be, but it is definitely a limitation. Now, unfortunately, at the time of making this video, at least, there really aren't any other options available for higher resolution screens that connect via USB, unless you go to Ultimate Game Tech, which is a completely different platform altogether. And you know, that has its own functionality, its own limitations, and we've covered that in some other videos as well for you. I'll put some links in the description to where we've talked about that. But yeah, if you want a single connection that connects via USB, so you're not having to take an extra port on your graphics card for HDMI or DisplayPort or something like that, then this is pretty much as good as it gets at the point of time of making this video. So I wanted to make that clear as well. I did speak to Grid Engineering about it, and they said that you know, as soon as there is a high resolution screen available, they will make a new model that utilizes that. But, you know, at the point in time, this is what it is, and it, you know, it is a lower resolution screen. So if sharpness is your thing, then, you know, maybe stick to using a phone. But again, like, using a phone does have its own pitfalls, because, you know, you have to go in, you have to push buttons, you have to make sure the battery is charged, that it's connected. You know, you have to go into a browser and open it up, and, you know, that is going to annoy some people. So having a dedicated device that just kind of works as soon as you fire up the software does have its merits as well. It just comes down to personal preference, really, and that's kind of a subjective thing. So I don't want to harp on about that too much. But yeah, in the context of just kind of replicating what we already have on the dash, it does work well, and it does definitely add something to the experience overall. So let's now have a look at some of the other functionality that we have here. So I'm going to flick across to a different dash here, and I'll have to flick through a few that I have on the system. So we'll go down to our Bosch dash, I think. I'll just get through this corner. Actually, we'll have a look at this first, because this is a good example of where the resolution becomes a bit of an issue. So this is a full timing table, or a standings table, that is showing me all the drivers and our relative times and deltas and everything like that. Now, I cannot read that at all, unfortunately. It is very small, but if this were a smartphone that was sitting on my rig, I would definitely be able to read that, no problem. I have done in the past, so I can tell you that unequivocally, but having it on this screen, I can't read those numbers at all, so that is kind of useless. We'll keep scrolling through though to our Bosch dash, and this is where things start to get a little bit more value add. Now, we will talk about Z1 dashboard in a moment too, because that has a lot of extra bits and pieces as well, and I think that's really where these dashes come into their own. But what we can do here is we've got our main dash that's showing us our tire temperatures, lap time. So already we're seeing information that we wouldn't have on the dash of the car that is valuable to us, but we can scroll through various pages here as well. So you can see now I have a track map in front of me. I'm getting 3 wide here, clobbering everybody. See if we can catch up with these guys again here. All right, there we go. Made it through relatively unscathed. Yeah, we can tab through, we can see our sector times, track map again, previous versus last. You know, all these kinds of things that are useful and genuinely will make you a more consistent driver. We can see we've got Dale Earnhardt Jr. in front of us here, apparently. The AI version at least. But we can see driver ahead, Delta, driver behind Delta, or gap I should say. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely has value in that regard. I mean, again, the sky's the limit here, as we saw before with Simhub. There's plenty of things you can do. You can let your creativity run wild. So it's certainly not limited to what we're showing here, but I think this gives you a pretty good idea of, you know, the level of functionality that you do have, and why I think that, you know, having a dedicated dash on your PC or on your sim rig can definitely be a beneficial thing. Now, another thing we need to talk about as well is visibility. So obviously having a wheel like this is a 320mm wheel, and we can see pretty clearly through the wheel. We can see the dash, there's no problem there at all. And we'll go for a drive in a minute when we look at the Z1 dashboard with a Formula style wheel as well, just to give you the idea of that. Now, one question I know a lot of people have is it better to have the dash fixed to the rig or a dash that's fixed to the wheel itself? Now, there are ways. Whoops, what's going on there? It's alongside me again. So hard to drive and talk and be competitive. We can go around the outside of him here. You're gonna have to try harder than that, buddy. There we go. So there are ways to mount the dash to the wheel. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, Grid don't have a solution for that at this point in time, but I'm sure they can custom make a bracket that would allow you to mount it. It is quite big and heavy though, so that is one thing that you want to keep in mind if you are looking at mounting it to your wheel, because that does obviously add rotating mass, which, you know, can be a problem for some wheelbases. So just something else to be mindful of. But visibility wise, I can see through the wheel just fine with a 320mm wheel, but obviously having a smaller wheel would start to become a problem. So you will need to just be mindful of the wheel that you are using, or have it mounted in a way where it's actually sitting up above the wheel. So just be mindful of that. Visibility wise with the LEDs as well, I've only got this running just as a rev counter at the moment, but you know, I can see that just fine. It's bright enough, and we've only got this running at about 30% brightness at the moment too, so there's no issues there. And one of the cool things about having LEDs that are separate from just having a display on on the display itself is that you can kind of see that while you're driving as well without having to physically look at it. So it kind of, you see that illumination in your peripheral vision, which means you can see the rev counter or the flag LEDs without actually having to take your eyes off the road, which is cool as well. So all these little bits and pieces all add up together, but I think what we'll do now is we'll pull in and we'll load up Z1 dashboard. There's a couple of things we have to do to get that running. So I'll show you that. We'll go into that in more detail, and then we can wrap things up with our final thoughts. So we've got Z1 dashboard here running now. We're just sitting in the pits so that I can run you through this without being distracted by driving for a moment. So I just wanted to elaborate first a little bit more on the difference between having the dash fixed to the sim rather than on the wheel. Now, what I generally find is when it's fixed to the wheel, I'm only really looking at when I'm on the straights anyway. So I don't really find a massive amount of difference for me, at least personally. And let us know what you guys think in the comments below, you know, for those of you who are using dashes on the wheel as opposed to fixed to your rig. But for me, yeah, I'm not looking at the screen when I'm turning generally anyway. So the fact that the screen is blocked when I'm turning my hands, you know, isn't really a big deal for me. Obviously, having the weight of the dash off the wheel can be beneficial as well, depending on the wheelbase that you're using. So I wouldn't really say that it's a strength or a weakness either way. There are obviously ways of mounting this to your wheel as well, should you wish to do so, as we mentioned before. But I just wanted to touch on that quickly before. Visibility, obviously, with a Formula style wheel is absolutely fine as well. And you can adjust up and down depending on what you want to do as the other cars go flying by me here. But let's just quickly run through the different screens that are available here. Now, there are a massive amount that you can go through. You can customize and build your own as well, obviously. And again, this piece of software does deserve its own dedicated video just to take you through all the functionality. But what I wanted to do here is basically just give you a general understanding of just how much stuff you can do here. So we'll scroll through. We've got a track map here with driver positions, timing and fuel calculations, lap timing, race distance, fuel calculations once again. We've got a lateral and longitudinal G-force graph here as well. And if we drive out, you can see that moves from side to side, which is kind of cool. Tire temperatures, tire wear, more data about engine parameters, boost level, fuel mix, rev limiter, you know, all these kinds of things that are going to be useful depending on the type of car that you're driving. Some pit information here as well. And then this is the one that I actually really enjoy. So this is a driver ahead on track and the driver behind on track. Shows their name, their car, their position. And if you're driving online as well, we're just in an AI race at the moment, so it's not being displayed. It'll also show their safety rating and their I rating too. So that's a really valuable way of sort of seeing if the car behind you or the car in front of you is likely to sort of be less experienced or more experienced, and sort of gauge whether you want to make a move or take a dive on them or whatever you want to do. Obviously, as we actually talked about in the video the other day, you know, knowing the character and the temperament of the driver around you can go a long way to helping you improve your safety on track. So that's definitely something that's valuable too. You can see here that's changing as the other cars go flying past. So again, this is all completely customizable, but there's a lot of things you can do here. And then back to our Cayman GT4 dash again as well. So let's have a more detailed look at the Z1 or Z1 software now. So there is a way that you can configure this so you can play around with it before you even buy a dash. So I would recommend doing that. You can load it in a web browser, just the same as you can with Simhub if you're familiar with that. You can load it in a web browser or on a phone or an external screen and have a little play with it. See whether you find that the functions that this software has are going to be valuable to you before you go and spend a fortune on a dash. So what we can do, you can see under network, we get an IP address here. We can just type that IP address, or that web address I should say, into a browser, and that will allow us to run that browser as if it were the dash. So very powerful there, very useful little function. But if we go through to our display tab here, we can see starting screen is, and these are the screens that we looked at just before. So we had stats, notes, laps, standings, track map, and dashboard. Dashboard being obviously the GT4 Cayman dash that we had. We can set up for a couple of different cars here as well. So we had car 1 configured, and you can see we had the Porsche 718 Cayman GT4 dash, which is pre-configured. And if we click on this menu, you can see just how many cars there are available by default in the software as well. So yeah, I mean, you guys can see that for yourself. You don't need to read that all out to you. So really powerful there. Lots of things that you can do. You can set up a second car as well. Now we do have a tab here as well for shift lights and external LEDs. Now, I wasn't able to get this running on this particular dash, but it doesn't look like it has as much functionality as we have through Simhub anyway. So I would definitely recommend, you know, if you're going to be doing this, run Simhub for the LEDs anyway. Then we've got tabs here for configuring strategy for pit stops. We've got our track map configuration where we can change colors. We can have text to speech as well, so we can have it call out what gear we're in, should you want to have that. I find that kind of distracting personally. But, you know, announcing gear, announcing DRS. We can have calls for when we need to pit relative to the strategy that we've set up as well. And you guys get the idea. There's just a ton of stuff that we can do in here. So while it's maybe not quite as adjustable and tweakable as Simhub is, the core functionality here in all the things that you can do that genuinely add value to the overall experience of sim racing and give you information that is useful to you while you're driving is, you know, very, very rich in this software as well. So definitely another one to check out. You do need to pay for a license with this software. It only limits you to 15 minutes at a time with the trial license, but again, it gives you enough functionality that you can jump in and give it a good test before you decide to drive. And just quickly jumping back onto the car tab, you can see compatible with a large range of sims as well, from Assetto Corsa, Competizione Automobilista, all the F1 games, iRacing, Project Cars 2, R Factor, Race Room, and so forth. So very versatile piece of software. But yeah, look, I mean, this dash is also compatible with Simhub, as we saw. We can use it with Joel Real Timing as well, or JRT. We're not going to cover that in this video because I think you get the idea of what the dash is capable of. So let's go now into our conclusions. I feel like we kind of established throughout the video that, you know, most of the functionality that we have here, particularly when it comes to the display, can be achieved in much cheaper ways. We can use a smartphone, an old tablet we might have laying around. We can use a dedicated display and connect it via HDMI to our PC. And all of those solutions will offer, you know, largely the same functionality, LEDs aside, and be a lot cheaper than this is. So really where this comes into its own is as a dedicated piece of hardware that's, you know, specifically designed for the purpose that it's serving, rather than being adapted across to suit that purpose. So whether or not there's value in that for you, particularly at an item that costs as much as this does, is really a subjective thing. But I think really the advantages here are, you know, it does away with a lot of that cumbersome setup of, you know, having to make sure the battery is charged in your phone, having to make sure it's connected to the correct network, opening up a browser, making sure the URL is correct, making sure you've got a dedicated IP address on your sim rig, for example, so that the IP isn't changing every single time you boot on. Little things like that that can be cumbersome and annoying when you're using other devices, you know, for this purpose. So there's definitely merit in having something like this, but whether or not it's worth the money to you is obviously a different matter. And that's something that you guys really need to decide for yourself. Obviously, using a dedicated display connected via DisplayPort or HDMI or some other means of display connection to your PC, that does take up an extra port on your graphics card or to your motherboard as well, so that can be annoying. And not for everybody, depending on the specs on your PC, but sometimes, particularly for people running lower end PCs, if you add an extra display that's running through the graphics card or off the motherboard, oftentimes that can have a detrimental effect on the performance of the sim. You might see drops in frame rate, CPU load can go through the roof as well. Now with the software that we're running with this, so Simhub and Z1 as we tested in the video, didn't see any problems like that at all. It wasn't, I mean, those are software packages that we're generally running on our sim rig anyway, but yeah, I don't expect that you should see any problems with, you know, any sort of detrimental effect to the performance of your sim. So that's something that's important to mention as well. But at the end of the day, what are you getting for the money? You're getting a very, very high quality piece of hardware, beautifully machined, beautifully anodized, you know, all top flight, top quality componentry all the way throughout, even just down to the bolts and screws that they're including, which are all completely stainless steel. You know, nothing has been cut here, no corners cut. Even when I had a look inside as well, and unfortunately I can't show this in the video, but I did have a look internally. Everything is really high quality there too. Everything's wave soldered, and just throughout the product you can see they've put a lot of attention to detail into this, and it's something that they're obviously very proud of as well. I think that the LEDs do genuinely add a useful component to this as well. I kind of thought, well, you know, are they really going to add all that much to the sim racing experience overall? But I think, as we kind of touched on in the video, when you have something that is illuminating brightly in your peripheral vision, it means you can kind of notice what's going on without having to take your eyes off the road. And I think that there is value in that for a lot of people. Depending on how high you have the brightness, of course, is going to determine how much of an effect that has. And again, when you have a look at what you can do in Simhub here, you know, there's all sorts of things that you can do, from, you know, having it indicate when there's a car next to you, to flags, to RPMs, you know, all those things are all possible. And really, again, the sky's the limit, and you can really let your creativity run wild with that as well. So I think that that is a little bit subjective as well. I think that some people will probably appreciate that functionality more than others will. Other people will be more focused on just the dash itself. But I think, you know, when it comes down to it, I personally liked the addition of those LEDs. I did find that I appreciated having them as opposed to not having them. Now, one function that I wish this dash did have that I did miss from other dashes that I've tested before was touchscreen compatibility. Now, unfortunately, because this is a glass fronted dash here and the USB D480 display is limited to resistive touchscreens. This touchscreen in your phone is a capacitive touchscreen, meaning that it can work with glass, whereas with a resistive one, you need to be actually touching the screen itself for it to work. So there's no real way to make it work with this display without making compromises in other areas, unfortunately. But not so much with Simhub. I've never really found touchscreens so useful there, but definitely with Z1, there are a couple of times when I wanted to sort of sit in pits and go through lap times, things like that. And while you can do it with a mouse and keyboard by bringing up the dash on another screen and kind of manipulating it that way, I did kind of miss being able to just tap on that burger menu and make adjustments on the dash itself. So I would like to see the option of maybe a version of this that doesn't have the glass, maybe has a carbon fiber front panel instead, that allows that easy touchscreen access. Again, subjective thing there. Some people would want it, some people might not want it, but I would like to see that option. Another option that I would like to see them add to this as well is an adapter plate to allow you to mount it to the wheel. And I believe that is something that they're working on. Just one thing I would mention though, if you are thinking about using it in that way, is that it does weigh 580 grams. It is quite a heavy little beast. So you may find that it makes your wheel, depending on the wheel you're using, too top heavy, might sort of try to topple over. So just a consideration there as well. It is quite heavy at 580 grams, but yeah, I would like to see them include, or at least have the option for a wheel mounted bracket as well, so you can mount it to your wheel. Now I know a lot of people are going to be comparing this to dashes which use the Ultimate Game Tech display system, which integrates the LEDs and the display in a similar type of fashion to this, and it is the same resolution display used in this to what is in the Ultimate Game Tech, for those who might be wondering as well. But one thing I do like about this, and I do think is worth calling out over the Ultimate Game Tech displays that I've used in the past, is that Ultimate Game Tech software is fantastic, and it does have a lot of versatility and functionality, but it doesn't quite have the same level of customization available as you have, and the ability to work with lots of different software packages like this does as well. So I do think when you're directly comparing the two, this would be my choice, or a similar kind of design to this, where we're using a separate USB D480 display and separate LED controller, as opposed to the Ultimate Game Tech solution, which does limit you to using their own software. And that is going to be a subjective thing. I think some people will prefer the Ultimate Game Tech system, some people will prefer this, and I would definitely encourage you to do your research, check out some of the Ultimate Game Tech displays that are out there, have a look at the software and see which one you think you prefer. But I personally just like the fact that this can work with so many different software titles, and it means that if someone else comes out with some software later on that's even better than Simhub, although I doubt that'll ever happen because Simhub is brilliant, but you know, if somebody else comes out with a software package, chances are you'll be able to use it with such a universally supported system like this one. Now, in terms of customer support, I did like the fact that they have a dedicated Discord community where they're supporting the product. I think it is still a little bit in its infancy, and I would like to see them add more profiles that are sort of tested by themselves rather than relying so heavily on the community to provide those profiles. So that's something that I'm sure we'll see over time. And you know, it does need to be said that, you know, a lot of the other sim racing dashboards that are out there don't have that kind of support to begin with anyway. So that is, you know, something that I think will improve over time, but something that I'm glad to see is there at a base point. And it'll be interesting to see how that kind of support establishes itself over time, and whether they're able to keep up that level of support as their customer base grows as well. I think often new companies can come out, you know, and they have really great customer support to begin with, but then as they start to get lots and lots more customers, that can start to be a little bit more difficult to maintain. So that's something that we'll definitely keep an eye on over time as well. But yeah, look, overall, I think if you're in the market for a very high quality, very nicely presented sim racing dashboard, and you're willing to spend the kind of money that this costs at $579 US, then this is definitely a contender. It's definitely the nicest sim racing dashboard that I've tested to date. And I think that this is a sort of product as well that's going to appeal to the sort of person that really likes to get in there and tinker with software and really extract the most out of something. I think that, you know, if you're just going to plug this into Simhub and just run the default profiles, then, you know, you're really not going to be getting the best experience with this. It really does pay to spend that time, really tweak it and really get it looking at its absolute best. So I hope this review has helped you guys out. If you're considering one of these, I'll put the link down in the description below to Grid Engineering as well. But yeah, look, overall, a very, very nice sim racing dashboard. Obviously, it is very expensive and it's not going to appeal to every single person. There are ways that you can achieve much of the same functionality in much cheaper ways, but all of those do have their pitfalls as well. And I think this, you know, suits the purpose very, very well for what it is. So thanks very much for watching, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed the review video. If you have, as always, leave a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel as well so you don't miss future review videos like this one. And we'll see you again soon. Bye. Ooh.